she was actually observed to climb into the bin on her own.
Tonight, no evidence of a homicide in the death of a woman found at a Winnipeg landfill.
I will protect all Indigenous practices, and I will streamline the process for First Nations to get things built on their own land.
It's the last day of a special meeting of the Assembly of First Nations.
When the previous centre closed back in 2018, there was such an outcry from the community.
And a gathering place for urban Indigenous peoples is planned in Winnipeg. Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. There is no evidence of homicide in the death of Linda Mary Brady. That's according to the Winnipeg Police Service. Her body was discovered by workers at the Brady landfill on Monday afternoon. Police Chief Danny Smythe provided an update on the investigation today. He said an autopsy showed Brady had injuries consistent with being in a garbage truck. They're still awaiting toxicology results, but investigators were able to track Brady's movements to mid-Monday morning.
She was positively identified attending a retail store on Pembina Highway. She was seen exiting the store alone and was seen attending to a nearby refuse bin at approximately 11:14 in the morning. And she was actually observed to climb into the bin on her own. Now, there was some activity observed within the bin, and after a short period of time, there was no further activity observed, but she was not observed climbing out of the bin.
Our regular Truth and Politics panelists, Carrie Benjo and Neegon Sinclair, are here now to discuss the latest. Carrie, Neegon, thanks for being with us. Of course, word of the discovery of another First Nations woman's body found in a landfill was making news all over the world. Winnipeg police now saying this was an accident and that the woman climbed into the dumpster herself. What are your thoughts on this, Neegon?
Well, her name is, of course, Linda Mary Brady. She's a 33-year-old mother of four. She's from Lake St. Martin First Nation. She's a mother, auntie, sister. A really remarkable statement was put out by her family. And so I think part of this is really remembering and honoring her and her life. And it's getting global attention. And certainly people originally thought this was a homicide. Even the Prime Minister yesterday called this a homicide without having the information. But, whether this is a death that is so-called accidental, we know that Linda, like many of us, carry a great deal of trauma, and part of that trauma ends up in the results that you see. No one goes into a garbage bin by choice. You go in there because you're struggling, you go in there because you're hungry, you go in there because you're cold. And so, like many of our people, the choices, we won't know the choice of exactly why did she go in there, but we do know that she is like many Indigenous women who are traumatized by this society, and this may be accidental, but certainly this was a death that, like many of Indigenous women and girls, was something created by policy and practice in Canadian society.
Yeah, Carrie, how do we address the underlying issues that may have led to this tragic event?
Maybe by start answering the calls to action. We have had numerous reports upon numerous reports, yet we don't see much action when it comes to concrete programs being done to address these disparities that a lot of Indigenous people are facing, not only on reserve, but especially in urban settings. We don't have enough spaces. We have houselessness, we have poverty, we have mass addiction issues that is just contributing to this issue. And I want to point out that when news first broke about another body being found, automatically I assumed that she was murdered. And I think a lot of people assume that. And that just speaks to society as in a whole. Like, we just automatically expect the worst outcome when there is a death of an Indigenous woman.
Nigan, you're probably seeing this as well. It's only been news for about an hour here or so that we found this out, but many are having a hard time trusting the Winnipeg Police's conclusion here. What do you think that says about the relationship with police?
Chief Danny Smythe from the Winnipeg Police Service held the press conference. It's a bit of a rarity, and I think it shows the severity of the issue and the way the Winnipeg Police are treating this seriously, because there's global attention on this. But, you know, typical kind of ways in which these things are framed, Chief Smythe did say things like, well, a toxicology report is forthcoming, and, you know, inferring that this is somehow the fault of Linda Beardy. This is a product of residential schools. This is a product of violence and abuse that's been rained down in our communities. It's also been indicative of a society that continues to devalue Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit peoples. And yes, we may not see a situation of murder here, but we may see missing. And absolutely, we see this happening time and time again, systematically throughout society. And that's why we have to really remember her name and think about who she is, what she contributed, and how we are all lesser than as a result. That's how we begin to change. And we need to take responsibility for this. Part of that is the Winnipeg Police being mindful and kind and sensitive in situations like this. And yes, it's important to get out in front of the story and to give out all the information and so on. But you know, sensitivity, I think, is something that needs to be brought to the forefront. And that's why people don't trust the Winnipeg Police Service.
Carrie, do you think that, you know, can you appreciate why people wouldn't be taking Winnipeg Police Chief's word on this?
I think it's just a natural response, because action doesn't happen overnight. It's everything that has happened has come from a grassroots level, a community level. All the action hasn't come from the top. The police haven't actively done anything. They didn't push for a report. They didn't push for statistics. It's the people that push. And if it isn't for the people pushing, nothing ever happens.
Carrie, Nigan, we'll have to leave it there, but do appreciate you coming together here today.
Yeah, thanks.
In other news now, First Nation chiefs are busy wrapping up an emergency Special Chiefs Assembly in Ottawa. And it was time for federal politicians to greet those still in attendance. Here's Annette Francis with the highlights.
It's the final day of the AFN's special meeting. Right off the top, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre sent a message promising to cut red tape for First Nations.
I will not allow it. I will protect your right to hunt. I will protect all Indigenous practices, and I will streamline the process for First Nations to get things built on their own lands, whether it's housing for their people or resource projects that can generate money for new clean drinking water.
Much of this morning was spent making revisions to draft Resolution Number 3, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act.
It reads, whereas the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP, was adopted into the General Assembly of the United Nations in 2007.
With a few additions and tweaks, the vote passed with just one objection. BC Regional Chief Terry Teegee holds a portfolio on the UNDRIP file. He's glad to see it pass. He said it's the reason for this Special Chiefs Assembly.
It is aligning much of the colonial laws from the federal government with UNDRIP, and that's a massive task in of itself, to, especially in our experience in British Columbia, considering that this is law in British Columbia since 2019. The challenge is really within government itself, is to change a machinery and change a culture.
Later, they heard from Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Mark Miller. Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations Vice Chief Heather Bear asked him about concerns over a province's Saskatchewan First Act. She says it will ignore treaty and inherent rights.
Some of the terminology seems to misunderstand the relationship and the basis on which the province of Saskatchewan was built. There are at least 2 Supreme Court judgments that say that treaties must be respected by provinces, and to make such blanket statements in a piece of provincial legislation does have the potential of not only undermining your rights, but paving the path for others to undermine your rights. And I think we need to remind and constantly remind ourselves that treaties do sit above provincial legislation.
Before leaving, the Chiefs voted on an omnibus package, which included 5 resolutions in all. Any unfinished business will be continued at July's Assembly in Halifax. Annette Francis, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Memorial University in Newfoundland is looking for a new president after they fired current president Vianne Timmins today. Timmins stepped away from her position last month after questions were raised about her claims of Indigenous heritage. She eventually apologized. The university let her go today, quote, without cause today, and appointed Neil Boss as the university's president and vice chancellor. He will stay in those jobs until a replacement is found. We have to step away now for a quick break, but coming up, a tent city on Vancouver's Hastings Street is coming down.
I'm very angry because it seems like society blames the people in the tents.
Welcome back. The community of Fort Babine, BC is in the middle of a housing crisis, and they're speaking out about the poor living conditions. APTN's Lee Wilson has more.
Woodhat, or Fort Babine community, are speaking out about the deplorable conditions of nearly half of their homes on reserve. Robbie Reed is a Fort Babine councillor. He says their members' houses are in need of major repairs.
Not only just these houses that's got mold problem, some of them is the foundation, like the basement foundation. Things like that, they need to correct that before, it's going to get worse.
Driving through Fort Babine, home of about 60 residents, Reed is frustrated with the conditions. One member has been waiting for renovations for nearly 5 years. He showed us black mold on the walls and a backed up sewage system.
On top and down there, but
Martina West points to a place she recently cleared black mold in her bedroom. Her house pipes burst nearly a year ago, and Lake Babine Housing partially shut off her water. They also removed her belongings due to a bug infestation. Since then, she has a near empty house, and she uses her shed to store the rest of her belongings.
I had a rough time. Sometimes I don't even eat, I just go to bed. I get tired of looking for stuff outside.
Bessie West is the other Fort Babine councillor. She says housing was a community concern before she got elected 11 years ago. She added the conditions are inhumane.
They can't live in conditions like that and be functioning people because they're busy trying to survive.
Reed says other members have moved out of their homes because of broken wheelchair ramps. They have asked Lake Babine Nation about repairs and new houses, but they're denied their requests. Lake Babine Nation main office has not returned APTN's calls or email requests.
I'm tired of begging for things. We shouldn't have to beg. We should be treated equal.
In the 1950s, two communities were amalgamated to form Lake Babine Nation. The government forced the majority to leave Fort Babine, and many relocated to the Wyoming Reserve and Burns Lake. The Fort Babine councillors are concerned about the lack of housing and resource allocation to their community. They fear they are being diminished.
They outvote us all the time. They got 4 councils in Wyoming and the chief. We got 2 councillors in Tatchett. Even if they side with us, we still get outvoted.
We contacted Indigenous Services, who oversee housing on reserves. After nearly a week and a half, the federal agency was unable to provide comment or Fort Babine housing data for the story. The Fort Babine community is calling for changes to its programs, services, and housing.
We want full services just like any other community. We want houses or people and children and elders can come home.
Lee Wilson, APTN National News, Fort Babine.
The city of Vancouver, along with the police, have started to dismantle a tent city that has sprung up on the downtown east side. But many are wondering where the hundreds of people who call the camp home will live. APTN's Tina House reports.
You're not protecting people!
Please move back. Please move back.
Tensions are running high as community members push back against police as they continue sweeping the street of people's tents and belongings. Police snipers can be seen from nearby rooftops as the Vancouver police form lines and push the crowd further down Hastings Street. Many here are angry that this is how the city of Vancouver is dealing with the situation of many who have been forced to make these sidewalks their homes. Herb Varley is an activist and says this is a terribly thought-out plan.
The thing about breaking up tent cities is that it's like shoveling water. You can't do it. Where are these people going to go?
Over at City Hall, Mayor Ken Sim addressed these concerns.
We need to restore Hastings as a street that is safe and welcoming to everyone.
With an escalation of violence, fires, and belongings taking up most of the sidewalk spaces, the city says it had no choice. However, they admit that not enough housing or shelter spaces are currently available.
There are more people seeking housing than we have housing available. That's absolutely correct. We have people sheltering outside across the city, and in fact, most of the people in Vancouver who are unsheltered are not on Hastings Street.
For Pat Weir, who has called this sidewalk on Hastings Street home for the last year, city workers just finished throwing out all his belongings in only tent.
Sir, what's moving everyone off the block that don't have homes.
Including yourself?
Yeah.
And so what do they do with all your stuff?
Well, they throw it in the garbage, or they auction it off at the police auction.
Oh, really?
At the end of the years. You know what I mean? And someone else ends up with it. But most of it goes into the dump or gets donated to the city or wherever it goes. I don't know.
And that's all you
Resold.
Those are all your belongings.
In my back of my bag, yeah. Yeah, I came here and I had tons of tools. I had my car. I had everything. Everything's gone.
With dozens of garbage trucks lined up and rows of police protecting them, the city of Vancouver is removing tents and other belongings, including blankets, clothing, and other survival gear. For this man, with police surrounding him, he is quickly trying to grab anything he can before city workers move in. And minutes later, his tent, along with whatever was inside, goes into the garbage truck. And for Pat Weir, he joins the hundreds of others who are not sure where to go now. What are you going to do now? What's happening for you tonight?
Tonight I'll do what I've done for the last year, walk around in the cold, you know what I mean? Get pneumonia again. You know, they're not doing anything for us, so. I mean, I just want to get a place. You know, 1 bedroom with a bathtub, and I don't want to live in an SRO where it's got cockroaches infested in them, and it's got friggin', you know, people stealing all your stuff that work in the organization, from what I heard from a lot of the people that have lived there. You know, and I'm just not interested in that. I just want a regular 1 bedroom or bachelor suite through BC Housing, you know what I mean? And just go on. Like, I'm 53, turned 54, you know what I mean? I'm tired of friggin' walking around the streets. I want to go back to work.
It's now day 2 of the city's plan to remove all tent structures from Hastings Street. But with rain forecast over the next week, and the mayor admitting that there wasn't enough shelter space for everyone that we've talked to are saying, where do we go? Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
Thanks, Tina. Time to step aside for another quick break. Still to come, big plans for a long-needed friendship center in Winnipeg.
When the previous center closed back in 2018, there was such an outcry from the community.
Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Here's the early morning at daybreak from the Cookham's Outreach Teepee Village. Thanks again to April Isidore for sharing this great photo. We always enjoy seeing your photos, so send them to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at Friday's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 9 in Halifax, snow, and 4 for Fredericton. -12 with snow in Kuujjuaq, 7 below and snow in Nain. +2 in Montreal, 3 below and snow in Val-d'Or. +1 in Sault Ste. Marie, 2 for North Bay. 2 in Thunder Bay, sunny, and +3 for Sioux Lookout. +3 under the sun in God's Lake, 4 for Norway House. 0 in Winnipeg, Dauphin and Barons River. -1 in Regina, sunny and +3 for Saskatoon. +4 in Meadow Lake, sun's out and 5 above for La Ronge. In northern Alberta, sunny and 8 for Fort Chip, 10 above under the sun in Fort McMurray. 12 in Edmonton, 17 for Lethbridge. 11 in Vancouver, Victoria and Campbell River. 11 in Prince George, 7 for Smithers. -7 in Old Crow, 6 above in Whitehorse. +5 in Yellowknife, -6 with snow in Norman Wells. -8 in Sax Harbor, 3 above in Paulatuck. -10 for Chesterfield and Whale Cove. -20 for Resolute and Arctic Bay. Ambitious plans are afoot for a Winnipeg Indigenous Friendship Centre after years without a gathering space. Those plans include a new drop-in centre, elder residence, and a bingo hall, all aimed at helping Winnipeg's urban Indigenous population who are facing poverty and food insecurity. Rachel Sandsregret with the Winnipeg Indigenous Friendship Centre says the former space shut down in 2008 following funding cuts and corruption.
When the previous center closed back in 2018, there was such an outcry from the community, from everyone from youth who were going there to access food programming, which was maybe their only meal of the day, seniors who accessed, they would go for community gatherings, feasts, cultural celebrations. Everyone missed it when its doors closed suddenly due to the corruption of the previous center.
And as you heard Rachel there, it was 2018, not 2008 when it shut down. Demolition of that former Indian and Métis Friendship Centre is expected to begin later this month. Over to Ottawa now, where Fraser Needham is standing by with a preview of tonight's Nation to Nation after a very busy week in Ottawa.
Coming up tonight, it appears all stakeholders have finally reached a First Nations Child Welfare Compensation Agreement. We'll speak to AFN Regional Chief Cindy Woodhouse on whether it's something that everyone can live with.
We organized and we got together, and this is a good day because it shows what we can do when we're united.
Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Kathy Merrick says something has to change after the body of another Indigenous woman was found in a Winnipeg landfill, and Indigenous protesters are speaking out against Royal Bank of Canada's involvement in the oil and gas industry. We'll have this and more in just a few minutes.
Looks good. Thanks, Fraser. You can catch Nation to Nation in just a few minutes' time here. We're all out of time for your APTN National News for this Thursday. You can find much more on anything you've seen here by heading on over to our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.